Okay, shall we make a start on this session, which is about learning outcomes? Let me tell you, the aim of the session is not to teach you how to write learning outcomes. The aim of the session is to reiterate the central importance of learning outcomes to the European higher education area, to talk about gaining consistency in how we view and write learning outcomes, and also maybe, I hope we have time, to have a brief discussion about the relationship between learning outcomes and competencies. So, learning outcomes are the building blocks of higher education reform. So, in the 2007 stock-taking report, they're described critically important in the development of national qualifications frameworks, systems for credit transfer and accumulation, the diploma supplement, recognition of prior learning, and quality assurance. So everything within the European higher education area is built on the foundations of learning outcomes. So if we don't get learning outcomes right, the rest of it probably won't be right either. So learning outcomes, Stephen Adam said this, have become the common language of education within the Bologna process. Now, I'm not sure that learning outcomes are the common language. We would like them to be the common language, but I think there are many different ways in which they're understood and applied, and so it might be the common language, but we can't always be sure what each of us are saying. This slide, by the way, I've got far too many slides for a short presentation, but the slides will be available and they'll give you some background. So this is just telling us that lots of progress is made in the European higher education area. Most nations are grasping the idea of learning outcomes and learning how to write learning outcomes. And I'd just like to say at this point that for an experienced teacher, the move to writing learning outcomes isn't that great. You don't have to learn a whole new technology. You don't need long, complex training courses. You do need some practice. You need some support from the institution. But it doesn't need a whole shift in what you do. There are some useful sites which you can see in when I leave the handout for you. These are places that have their program catalogues online, and you can see really good examples of program specifications and learning outcomes. And so, well, I know what academics do really. When they write learning outcomes, they look at other similar programs, they look at what the other learning outcomes are, and sometimes they steal from them. So these are quite good sites to go to if you want to review how learning outcomes are written. Now, way back when, I can't remember when this was, 2006 or 7, Declan Kennedy, Anya Hyland and Norma Ryan wrote this very simple, straightforward guide it was then called the Bologna Handbook, it's now called the European Journal of Higher Education. And this is such a nice, straightforward guide to writing learning outcomes and using learning outcomes. It's still relevant today, the advice is still pertinent, so I would recommend everyone who wants to write learning outcomes to look for this article. Or you can look for this book, very practical guide to writing learning outcomes. Now, why I've raised this subject now is to talk about some of the issues in using learning outcomes. As I've said, they're part of the massive higher education reform package. There are big questions about how to introduce them institutionally. Should they come from the bottom up or from the top down? In any case, every institution should have a strategy to support its teachers to use learning outcomes. Probably somewhere in the middle between top down and bottom up would be the best approach. And then coupled with that is the skeptical approach of some staff members that learning outcomes and the Bologna process is about dumbing down, restricting academic freedom. And so that's why it's important to use learning outcomes in a proper way as the building blocks for the reforms. Otherwise, it's just a paper exercise and it loses credibility. And the final point there is a lack of clarity and a lack of shared understanding on key terminology. So, for example, learning outcomes and competencies are often used interchangeably as if they were one and the same thing or very close relations. And why I'm making this presentation today is at the Oslo seminar, this publication, Tuning publication, A Guide to Formulating Degree Programme Profiles, was presented to the Bologna experts. And immediately after, we had a small workshop with the author of the publication. And almost everyone who wrote a learning outcome in the room I was in were told that learning outcome's wrong. That's not right. That's not good enough. And I wondered what was going on, because straight after that session, I attended Declan Kennedy's session. People had to practice right learning outcomes, and he was saying, that outcome's great. Now, how could you make this outcome better? How could you improve? So I'd been in 2 sessions, one where everyone was doing everything right, and one where everyone was doing everything wrong. So I was curious to look into this publication. So together with Declan Kennedy and Anthony Vickers, we wrote this very nice publication, Learning Outcomes, Degree Profiles, the Tuning Project and Competencies. And in this article, we draw attention to a number of inconsistencies that are in the Tuning publication. And in our opinion, the Tuning publication could seriously hinder the implementation of learning outcomes. And if the implementation of learning outcomes are hindered, so are all of the other higher education reforms. So, this is us saying we have serious concerns regarding the contents of the recent publication, Tuning Educational Structures in Europe, supported by the Commission. Let me just say, though, I'm not criticising the Tuning Project as a whole. I think the Tuning Project's been great in mobilising and facilitating the reforms. But in this case, they've got a little bit above themselves, because the publication has absolutely invented a new definition of learning outcomes. The new definition comes from nowhere. It's not based on any literature, it's not based on any evidence, there is no links to any literature or evidence in the publication, it's just there, and you're told this is the correct way to do it. Also, it links the issue of learning outcomes very strongly with competence and competencies, saying that you must have competencies, and learning outcomes are only there so that you can design competencies. Now, that's not true. If you look in the ECTS handbook, it doesn't talk about competencies. It talks about learning outcomes. So the importance of competencies has been elevated. And for many teachers, translating learning outcomes into competencies is a very difficult, if not impossible, task. Why is it so difficult? Because if you look in the literature, there are over 200 definitions of competencies. And so if I'm using a competency in the UK, it might be commonly understood what it means, what it stands for in the UK. But as soon as I move into an international environment, the meaning becomes less clear. So if I asked everyone in this room for their definition or understanding of a competency, I think we'd come up with, how many people are here? 50, with 50 different definitions. If you look in the Tuning publication that tells you to write competencies, you'll find an explanation that their definition of competencies is different from the definition in the European qualification framework. And so already you're having to work with two different and maybe confusing competencies. And the final main criticism of the publication is that throughout the publication, it implies that if you want to use Bologna or the Bologna tools, you have to also use the tuning methodology. And that's completely false. Of course, we know that's false. If you want to implement Bologna, implement Bologna. You don't need any fancy accompanying system or any great training in the tuning methodology. You can implement Bologna as you wish. So, to my mind, it's overcomplicating the process. It's making the situation less rather than more clear. So, just to remind you, the ECTS User's Guide has a very simple, straightforward definition of learning outcomes. Learning outcomes are statements of what the student is expected to know, understand, and or be able to demonstrate after completion of a process of learning. So that may be a program, it may be a module, it may be an individual session. Nice and clear. Absolutely, you must write down what the student should see. This is the tuning definition. A learning outcome is a measurable result of a learning experience which allows us to ascertain to which extent, level, or standard a competence has been formed or enhanced. Now, you'll see that these two definitions are very different indeed. The first definition says nothing about the level, nothing about the standard. The learning outcome is not a result. The learning outcome only becomes a result when it's been assessed. The learning outcome is a statement. So it's not a result, it has nothing to do with competencies, nothing to do with enhancement. It's a simple statement. And once people start to think that the learning outcome is more than a simple statement, it becomes more and more difficult to write program specifications and module descriptors because the meaning of learning outcomes is unclear. If we look around the world, if we look to the USA, Australia, and Sheffield, you'll see in all the literature, the definition of a learning outcome is more or less the same. Descriptions, statements, it's about what the learner will know, do, or understand as a result of learning. Absolutely no definition anywhere in the world, whether it's the US, Australia, or even Sheffield, no definition supports the tuning definition of learning outcomes. What are learning outcomes? These are the essential components. You don't need to learn any grand methodology. Once you start to understand learning outcomes, you can begin to understand the whole jigsaw puzzle, which is the EHEA. So, learning outcomes, statements of what the learners will do, they must be assessed. They must involve students doing some kind of work. So you can't have a learning outcome, the student will be handsome, because you don't have to do any work. They need to be written in a holistic way, and you should give feedback to the students on the learning outcomes. Simple. There's your simple rules for writing learning outcomes. And, as I've said, the learning outcome can be for a whole program or part of a program. They must be realistic and actually describe what the student can do. They should be simple, so that when potential students are looking at your website, they can see, what do I have to do to pass this? They should also be simple so that professors can understand what they should be doing as well. And they must be capable of being assessed. Starting to write, this is revision for most people here. Clearly written so they can be understood by everyone. Focus on the students, not on what the teacher does, on what the student will do. Use phrases like, on successful completion of this module, the student should be able to do, and then you have your learning outcome. Avoid complicated sentences. If you need more than one sentence to describe what the student will do, then use more than one sentence. Because the more simple it is, the easier it is to assess, more realistic chance you have of achieving your goals. And you should write between 5 and 8 learning outcomes per module. So the aim is to really get people to focus on what the essential learning is. And I'll just mention one other difference between this approach and the tuning approach. I think when you have a learning outcome approach, you write your learning outcomes, you share them with colleagues, you discuss them with colleagues, and the aim is refinement and improvement. It's not a case, this is right, this is wrong. It's a starting point for discussion. And often you can find yourself engaged in real conversation about the curriculum and how the teaching's undertaken. Conversation that's often strangely absent from universities, I find. And there are some words we should avoid. So make sure you're using active verbs. So doing words, we used to call them in primary school. You're saying the verb that describes what the student will do. So no terms like the student will understand, because you can't measure understanding easily, or learn, or be familiar with, be exposed to, be acquainted with, be aware of, appreciate. They're all fuzzy examples that are difficult to measure in practice. The student should be able to read the learning outcome and say, and know what they would have to do to demonstrate that they've achieved it. You can use Bloom's taxonomy as a guide to help you write a good range of learning outcomes. They need to be measurable and fit with the aims of the content of the module, as well as being student-centered. I'm not going to read this one out. Just to tell you that Stephen Adams said all these nice things about the learning outcome approach, and if he said it, that's good enough for me. And I'll skip this one because I want to have a conversation. Right, I'll finish this brief presentation with this quote. Learning outcomes represent one of the essential building blocks for transparent higher education systems and qualifications. It's important that there should be no confusion about their role, nature, and significance, or the educational foundations of the Bologna process will be weakened. So that's my aim in highlighting the problems I see with this tuning publication, and also for reminding you of how to write learning outcomes. And I think maybe in our remaining time, we can talk about some of these questions. Are learning outcomes enough to describe what we want our students to do? Or do we need something else? Do we need competencies? Do we need anything in addition to learning outcomes? Second question, how do we link learning outcomes to the labour market? Because if you talk to employers and enterprises about learning outcomes, they often don't know what you mean. If you talk to them about competencies, they understand immediately. They might have a different understanding of competency, but they seem to like the language that talks about competencies. So how can we bridge that gap? So, that's the end of my presentation. So should we have a discussion about learning outcomes and other issues? Raimonda.
So I will start most probably, but I think we are in for heated discussion here. First of all, thank you very much for your very controversial presentation. Yes. I think it leads us to a lot of things to discuss. First of all, I would like to say about competences and learning outcomes. I would like to put you into our Lithuanian context. We had 3 years project based on tuning. And I find it a bit confusing even, you know, to hear it being discussed that competences are not necessary. We had foreign experts, most of them were from the UK, and all of them used language of competences. I've been to Mr. Kennedy's discussion group, and I really liked it, and I can say it's really wonderful when we are talking about course unit and subject area. The higher we go, the less Bloom's taxonomy helps us. And to tell you the truth, if we get stuck to Bloom's taxonomy, we get stuck in the 20th century. We are in the 15th century. If you Google on the word competence, what do you find? Mostly you will find job descriptions. So getting rid of the word competence means a kind of cutting our tie to the outside world. It's one thing. Another thing, it makes perfect sense, and I think we have proven in what we are doing in our country, the way our methodology has been developed together with tuning, it's completely compatible. You know, the use of competence, the use of learning outcomes, and so on and so forth. So saying that competence has not been described in literature, there is no excuse. So we could do that. And I don't know if you know, people say this, but the world uses this. And in the curricula, the way we construct curricula, the higher we go, the more we need this word, in my opinion. And at least what is based in what we've been doing here. So I really appreciate the opinion of the others, how they say it. And of course, I am not saying that anything is perfect in this world, but here we are to discuss it. Here we are to agree on something. But let's not oversimplify, and let's not stay at a single teacher's level when we are talking about qualifications framework. We need some kind of meta language as well. If we are not going to do that, we will stay, you know.
Okay, thank you. Let's see if anyone else wants to make comments. But to me, this isn't a controversial presentation. It's absolutely straightforward, in support of the Commission's view. In my mind, the tuning project publication is really controversial because they're in a highly regarded position and they're making statements. I mean, Raimonda, would you agree with that definition of a learning outcome? The tuning definition. Sorry.
Okay. Can I take some precious time to intervene? I must say that when I saw this article on the website, you know, for this conference, of course I didn't see the original publication that was being reviewed on the site, on the website. I only saw the review, which is not a fair way of approaching the problem in academic terms. So from academic to academics, I must say that when I read the article, I first was pleasantly surprised because I said, oh, wow, some UK colleagues are finally appreciating the CTS guide after having fought against it for years from within the drafting group and outside the drafting group, trying to change it, to revise it. So there's always been a great hostility against the CTS guide. So this was pleasant to see that finally, you know, three British colleagues were appreciating the definition included in the guide concerning learning outcomes. But I must say that that was the only pleasant aspect of my reading of the article, because from what I felt that after having discovered that there was some truth in the guide, our colleagues from the UK took a very dogmatic approach about it, in the sense they do claim in the article that this is the only possible truth and that the way it is implemented in UK is the best possible way. And they offer themselves as consultants, as producers and writers of books. You have sort of presented and advertised the number of books that are published in the UK concerning learning outcomes. Then you also imply that any different ideas that do not conform with the way it's done in the UK or in the definition that you mentioned are wrong and harmful. And you take upon yourselves the role of guardians of what you consider the orthodox approach to learning outcomes and so on and so forth. So you actually have launched an attack, and can I call it a crusade, against the tuning project that you don't seem to know so well, because in your literature, in the literature that you list in your article, you do not include all the publications produced by the tuning project. You include what you consider the literature is mainly produced in UK by some of you, or some of the authors of the articles as well, but you do not include the literature produced by other people at the international level, collaborating with the tuning project. So this is not what I consider fair academic fairness, again. And what I found extremely unpleasant is that you used a very rude, condescending tone, and you didn't switch off your telephone, when referring to the work that hundreds of colleagues from different countries, from different continents have done together, discussing, reaching consensus, developing principles and definitions they agreed on, and they implemented in various institutions, and they produced results that have been available to everybody for free. They're available on the website, so you can look and consult them, and you can contribute in a constructive way to any of these publications if you want. And another observation I want to make, by chance, by mere chance, the people who have written the user's guide that you seem to finally appreciate are the same people that have been very active in the tuning project, which means they don't see any conflict or contradiction between the two approaches, but they just think that they're just moving forward. They are adding other ideas, other suggestions, other possible ways to approach the problem in order to reach the common goal, which is achieving learner-centeredness in the Bologna process. Introducing the concept of competencies is certainly positive. So the fact that all the wording you're using in your article concerning the tuning project is damage, danger, confusion, false, errors, it's totally unfair. I think this is not a fair academic contribution to the debate. You're marketing your own approach to the problem of learning outcomes. You're quoting people from the UK all the time. I think this is not fair. We are moving towards learning approach, towards a learning outcomes approach together, coming from a number of different countries with a number of different traditions and experiences, and we're making an effort to move there. You cannot produce, your ready-made product definitions and ready-made solutions, your minute descriptions of how it should be done, the active verbs, the number of state, the number of competencies. You're just simply exporting what you have done in the UK. This is not the way it should be done in the Bologna process. We have to move towards the same goals together. I'm sorry, but I found this article extremely irritating and extremely unfair. I don't want to say unethical, because it would be too much, but I certainly didn't appreciate it.
Okay. Okay, so someone at the front would like to make a comment. Can I just point out that the authors of the article are from the UK and Ireland, not just the UK. And I'll stand by everything I said in the article, because I didn't hear any criticism of the academic content of the article. And if there is any justification for any of the definitions given in the Core 2 publication, I'm happy to listen to the academic arguments. But there is no evidence. And to me... Huh? Well, I'm not here to answer for the tuning project. I'm presenting this discussion. So people from the tuning project are in the audience, quite welcome to talk. So, sorry, you have a comment.
Just kind of a comment and reflection. You know, I represent National Tempus Office in Russia, but we're not only kind of an administrative body, we're also doing lots of our own research and supporting our ministry and universities in modernizing higher education. And we used to be fans and enthusiasts of tuning. We were very happy when a cohort of our universities won a Tempus tuning project. But you know, with time, and I'm saying it very openly and frankly, we felt, because you know, in the system that was traditionally very much knowledge transfer and teacher-oriented, we needed a change in the mindset and a very clear and transparent methodology of doing it without making life more difficult. And with time, and I personally, I monitor the tuning projects, and whenever there are problems at our universities with implementing the Tempus tuning in Russia, they all come to the National Tempus Office and say, well, what do we do? Because we want clarity, we want transparency, and we were feeling more and more confused because the procedures and the developments of those competencies and degrees of assessing the competences and different mega competences, meta competences, profiles, it all just makes life more difficult. And the learning outcomes approach, we have also piloted it in our own programs and inside the country. And those universities who have tried relying on learning outcomes, we do not say that Bloom's taxonomy is everything. For example, well, the verbs from the affective domain, they don't always make me happy. But at least it's all very transparent. And it's very clear how you can link these with employment specification, which for our system is very important. And as you can understand, our system is not small, over 2,000 universities, if not more. And so I'm not saying which is good or which is bad. I'm only saying that somehow with practice, we're becoming more and more aware that the learning outcomes approach in a system that is undergoing a transition from the teacher-centered to student-centered, it's more productive, more transparent, and it strongly enhances the assessment. You know, this Lola thing, which we love, and this is why we love Anthony Vickers, because he introduced us to Lola at some point a couple of years back. So Lola is learning outcomes, learning assessment. It really is an eye-opener to us. So that's simply my reflections.
Okay, thank you. And any, yeah, and then the next comment is 2 rows in front. Thank you.
Thank you for the nice lecture we have heard. I would like to present a model of the way one of the Palestinian universities have had in writing learning outcomes. And the approach is construct of like a matrix of 3 dimensions. The first dimension is Bloom's taxonomy, the 6th category of Bloom's understanding or definition of learning, starting from memorization and ending with evaluation things. In addition to Bloom's classification, which is really important to add, is kind of like skills depending on the branch of study you are in. If you are in engineering, or you are in humanities, or you are in medical, or whatever. But generally speaking, you have like a category defining skills in terms of like entrepreneurship skills, or public relations skills, or and so on, in addition to competences. This is like one dimension. The other dimension is the chapters of the curricula. Okay? And now, by having such two dimensions, you end up with cells. In each cell, corresponding to each chapter of the curricula, and each level of Bloom's classification plus the skills we add, you can define the learning outcomes in the way you present, by starting with a verb, like able to make the evaluation of so, depending on the chapter and so on, okay? But the important issue is who will determine the learning outcomes in these cells. In our experience, we did that we invite the employers, in addition to the teachers who are in the department of, let us say, X program, and together they agree upon some learning outcomes, and as a total for each course, they end up with a common learning outcomes for the whole program. This is the way they did the approach in one of the universities. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Richard? No? Just here? Okay. 1, 2, 3.
Thank you. I hope that another contribution from the UK will be tolerated at any rate, but perhaps coming from a slightly different angle and looking at how a professional body in the UK, which is the United Kingdom Engineering Council, which is the organisation that I'm attached to, actually looks at the different elements of learning outcomes and of competence. Because my organisation sets out the criteria for the accreditation of degree courses in engineering in the UK. It also specifies the statements of competence and professional commitment which people have to demonstrate in order to become recognised as professional engineers. And it sees the two things as different, not wholly unrelated, but as different. We would not expect degree courses in engineering to deliver more than certain elements of competence. If you like, some of the cognitive elements of competence. Competence itself, but without going into all the different definitions, clearly being a mix of several different dimensions, and I would suggest that professional competence has a kind of meta-competence level added to the individual components to it. But we have looked quite hard at this, and whether it was possible to actually relate statements of professional competence directly to the outcomes from engineering degree programs. And we decided it wasn't useful to attempt to do so. I do anticipate that, because you've referred to the fact that employers seem to quite like competence statements, not always certain they know what they mean by that, but they do seem quite to like them. I think it's possible to do work which relates learning outcomes from degree programs to eventual statements of competence, but I don't think it's useful to try and graft competence requirements directly onto degree programs. That is certainly how the engineering profession in the UK has approached the issue. I think it's something that is worthy of further discussion with the higher education community as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. Can I just, now there are a few people who want to talk, so if we can take you first, and then at the front, second, and then someone here, third, and then you fourth. This is the order I've seen people. Yeah?
Can I speak? Andrzej Kraśniewski, Warsaw University of Technology, Poland. Look, we are using English language here in the discussion, but you have to consider that sometimes we have to translate those statements into some other language. And it might be not that easy sometimes. So looking at those two definitions, I really don't have any problems with translating the first one into Polish. And it will be, I think this translation will be easily understood by everybody. Talking about the second definition, if I translate it into Polish, and I will try to explain what I mean by a learning outcome, I will have to explain what a competence is, what a standard is, because this definition contains two words that are not explaining. So that's one of my comments. So I would definitely prefer to use the first one. Just, it's intuitive, say. And another comment is about not this particular, say, term, but another one. In the tuning publication, I have found the term degree profile, which is very confusing to me just because the original, say, introduction of the European qualification framework for higher education, the document presented to the ministers in 2005 and adopted by the minister, defines the profile in a quite different way. There are actually two definitions of a profile, but neither of them is consistent in what the tuning project describes as a degree profile. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. Can we take this person who's been waiting at the front?
Thank you. I'm professor of electrical engineering from Jordan. There is two issues. Faculty members, they are happy with the term learning outcomes, and the industry and the workplace, they are very familiar with the issue of competencies. Mm-hmm. So I think, it's our responsibility to, say this learning outcome will lead to the following set of competencies so that we can bridge the gap between the academia and the industry. Mm-hmm. And I think this link is still, to a certain extent, is missing. Mm-hmm. This is the first point. The second point, concerning the learning outcomes, who is responsible for developing the learning outcomes? Is it the responsibility of a professor teaching a course to put the learning outcomes? I think, the learning outcomes, it has 3 or 4 different levels. At the university level, the university, they should decide what sort of learning outcomes for their community, for the students, whether they're undergraduate or a graduate. This is the first level of learning outcomes. The second level, it's at the discipline area. If I am in engineering, I should have certain set of, then at the departmental level. So it's not the process to be carried by a faculty member to decide what sort of learning outcomes as a student I should comprehend. Yeah. So I think it's a system will decide upon the set of learning outcomes at the 3 different levels. And there is a technique called the mapping technique. I'm not sure if you are familiar with the mapping technique, how curriculum are developed in order to achieve the different learning outcomes or the set of competencies from the general point of view, from the main field, from the specialization area together. So we put all these together to produce a very well-rounded graduate, so will be positive as a citizen and will be positive as in the workplace. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I think what you're saying is that the learning outcomes are the result of discussion with all of the stakeholders. But someone has to take the responsibility to actually write them, and that's usually the professor. And okay. Sorry, there was... yeah, we'll take your question next after this one.
Thank you. I'm Katerina Galanaki from the Athens University of Economics and Business in Greece. I simply would like to say that I was fully covered by Maria Stiki. And just to add 2 words. When we started 11 years ago working for tuning, some crazy people all around Europe, just trying under the coordination of Julia and Robert to do something on tuning the educational structures in Europe, I was one of these crazy people who started doing this job. We tried to do our best. We tried to respect educational structures. And I come today, after all these years, to hear that tuning is a danger. For me, it was a real shock. I thought that it was a real contribution in higher education. Our main purpose was to respect the rules and try to really tune the educational structures. We were, those days, 110 persons, if I remember well. And today I hear also that tuning is trying to replace Bologna or I don't know what. Tuning had not this scope. It was just a matter of working under full transparency, under the perception of preparing student-centered study programs in order to help our students and our graduates. That was our main aim. So all these tasks, all these questionnaires, all this work, all these efforts to convince our colleagues in the universities to cooperate with us, to give us their feedback, our students, our teachers, etc., make us feel wonderful and go on trying to help institutions. The word danger for me, it was a real shock, and I feel really very sorry for this. That was not our scope. The only scope is under academic freedom to listen to all aspects, the aspects of our colleagues from United Kingdom, the aspects of everybody all over the world. And as we say that Erasmus goes global, this is one of the 10 manifesto points we prepared the Erasmus ambassadors all over European Union. We would like to say that tuning goes global, and we insist on that. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now, I think we've just got time for one comment, but I'll just respond to the last brace of comments. At no point, either today or in this article, have I said that tuning is dangerous. You can hear that if you'd like to, but I have never said it. I have said that this publication is dangerous and misleading. I'm not criticizing the tuning project as a whole. And I will happily stand by every point that I make in this article, and I'm happy to discuss with people on academic grounds or an academic basis. Show me the evidence that contradicts what I've written, and I will happily listen to it. But to me, the fact that tuning's been around for a long time and we've all tried hard isn't an academic argument. And denigrating a whole nation for not using the ECTS handbook, that's not an academic argument. That's a personal insult to a whole country. Because the publication is in the authorship of the UK and Ireland. It's not a UK publication. So I'll happily discuss any of the contents of the publication. But I don't want to listen to arguments about what the UK does and doesn't do, because I can't speak for 60 million people. One comment from over here.
Thank you very much. This is Pia Scherer from University of Liechtenstein, and I've got not an easy question for you, I suppose, because I feel it can accumulate a couple of things that have been discussed. We're in the process of self-referencing the NQF at the moment, and there's been some confusion because some people take it very literally, and the question has been, or the question also to you would be, how can I explain in easy terms the link between Dublin descriptors and then using Bloom, etc., to formulate learning outcomes? Because the problem that we've had is that people felt that the Dublin descriptors have to go down to the model descriptors, and the Bloom is not acceptable, which I found to explain how learning outcomes work. Bloom is very, very useful. So do you have an easy answer that I could pass on to people? Or am I opening up Pandora's box? I hope not. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I think Bloom is there, as you say. It's a guide. It's not a rule. And there are many other taxonomies that are available and can be used. Yeah, we shouldn't be led into thinking that's the only way to do things. And you can use any approach to write the learning outcomes. It doesn't need to be related to Bloom's taxonomy, but I guess your qualifications would need to show progression. And Bloom's taxonomy is an easier way to show that progression, I think.
How do Bloom, if we take Bloom, or whatever we take as a taxonomy, at the bottom, defining learning outcomes for lectures and modules, how do they relate to the Dublin descriptors?
Yeah, I can't answer that question off the top of my head, but yeah, I'm sorry, I can give it some thought and come back to you, sorry. Okay. Thank you, and thanks for all the contributions, and it's lunchtime now, so thank you for attending, have a nice lunch, enjoy the rest of the seminar. Yeah.